Biden sent an angry letter to big oil executives. From the New York Times, Biden slaps oil companies for profiteering at the pump. In a letter to 7 large energy firms, the president said excessive margins were worsening the pain for American customers. President Biden chastised some of the largest oil companies for profiteering off surging energy prices and, quote, worsening that pain for consumers as he increased the pressure on them to boost refining capacity and bring down costs at the pump. With the average price of gas in the U.S. topping $5 a gallon, Biden pointed the finger at the energy firms in a letter to 7 executives. He demanded they explain their decision to limit refining capacity and announced that his administration would hold an emergency meeting to discuss ways of stemming the crisis. Quote, at a time of war, refinery profit margins well above normal being passed directly on to American families are not acceptable, Biden said in a letter. There is no question that Putin is principally responsible for the intense financial pain. That's not true. We only get about 3 to 4% of our oil from Russia, but I digress. He said there's no question that Vladimir Putin is principally responsible for the intense financial pain the American people and their families are bearing. But amid a war that has raised gasoline prices more than $1.70 per gallon, historically high refinery profit margins are worsening that pain. The letter, which went to executives at BP, Chevron, ExxonMobil, Marathon, Phillips 66, Shell, and Valero, extends an effort by the president in recent weeks to pin at least some of the blame on firms raking in billions in profits. So, why I bring up this letter, which I don't know, he's the president. If he wanted to send a message to the oil companies, can he not get the media to cover a press conference he would give on this? Can he not say this on camera? Can he not say a little more to these oil executives? Well, he can. You want to know how I know that? A lot of you might not have been alive, but JFK, before the CIA got to him, JFK in 1962 had to deal with the steel companies and their price fixing. Maybe some of you remember this, maybe some of you don't. U.S. Steel at this time in 1962 had jacked up prices on steel I believe it was $6 a ton. Let's see what President Kennedy had to say.
The simultaneous and identical actions of United States Steel and other leading steel corporations increasing steel prices by some $6 a ton constitute a wholly unjustifiable and irresponsible defiance of the public interest. In this serious hour in our nation's history, when we are confronted with grave crises in Berlin and Southeast Asia, when we are devoting our energies to economic recovery and stability, when we are asking reservists to leave their homes and families for months on end, and servicemen to risk their lives, and 4 were killed in the last 2 days in Vietnam, and asking union members to hold down their wage requests, at a time when restraint and sacrifice are being asked of every citizen, the American people will find it hard, as I do, to accept a situation in which a tiny handful of steel executives whose pursuit of private power and profit exceeds their sense of public responsibility can show such utter contempt for the interests of 185 million Americans. A few gigantic corporations have decided to increase prices in ruthless disregard of their public responsibilities. Some time ago, I asked each American to consider what he would do for his country. And I asked the steel companies. In the last 24 hours, we had their answer.
Wow. A little more direct than a letter, wouldn't you say? Little more direct than a letter. But he went beyond a press conference. Let me read this, how JFK forced steel price rollback. It was a corporate double cross 50 years ago this month that produced one of President John F. Kennedy's most famous lines. The Democrat, after just a year in office, was concerned about potentially rising inflation. His administration set an informal but well-publicized target of having wage increases and price hikes match productivity increases. Meanwhile, steel workers bargaining over contract with the nation's steel companies were getting nowhere. The administration intervened. It didn't want a rerun of the 4-month steel strike of 1959 under President Eisenhower. Labor Secretary Arthur Goldberg, a longtime union counsel, mediated the talks. The two sides reached agreement on March 31st. The pact with 10 of the nation's 11 steel companies called for an increase in fringe benefits worth 10 cents an hour in 1962, but no wage hikes that year. Then AFL-CIO President George Meany said that in the pact, the union, quote, settled on a wage increase figure somewhat less than the steel workers thought they would get. Kennedy praised the contract as, quote, obviously non-inflationary, and said both the United Steelworkers and the steel firm showed, quote, industrial statesmanship of the highest order. The agreement also implicitly said the companies would not raise prices as that would be inflationary. Well, the companies then moonwalked and reneged. On April 10th, Roger Blau, CEO of U.S. Steel, the largest of the firms with 25% of the market, met Kennedy in the Oval Office and told him the company was immediately raising prices by $6 a ton and that other steel companies would follow. 6 did. The 3.5% hike enraged the president. What he said in public was biting, but he was even more caustic in private. In an April 11th, 1962 press conference, Kennedy called the price hikes a wholly unjustified and irresponsible defiance of the public interest. He criticized, quote, a tiny handful of steel executives whose pursuit of power and profit exceed their sense of public responsibility. The execs had utter contempt for the U.S., Kennedy said. In private, he added, my father always told me that all businessmen were sons of bitches, but I never believed it until now. Well, your father was also a son of a bitch, but that's neither here nor there. The line quickly became public. The Defense Department, run by former auto executive Robert McNamara, let it be known it planned to shift a submarine construction contract to a smaller steel firm that also refused to raise prices. The other firms that followed U.S. Steel, led by Bethlehem, retreated. By April 13th, even Blow of U.S. Steel had caved. The GOP screamed, the firms stewed. So, shocker, the president, using his contracts with the military-industrial complex, played a little hardball. Said, yeah, we're not giving you this submarine contract. We're going to move it over to these fine folks who aren't rising steel prices and basically price fixing the steel industry. I don't know. Does Biden have any, bows in the quiver? Do we not give ExxonMobil and all of these fossil fuckers another shirt, by the way, you could get in the Status Coup store? Those fossil fuckers, go get that shirt, lickety split. Can he not say, yeah, if you're going to be price gouging the American people during a tough time and you're going to be raising prices $1 to $2 higher than they need to be or they should be, maybe we don't need to give you those subsidies that basically over a decade, you're talking hundreds of billions of dollars to these fuckers who have record profits. Yeah, actually, I think we're going to pull back on those subsidies. Why won't he do that? Just think, why won't he do that? Well, it's all interconnected. For example, let's look at Standing Rock when I was covering that. It's not just the direct money that goes to the oil companies, or the direct money that the oil companies donate to politicians. Because in terms of politicians, believe it or not, the oil companies donate a lot more directly to the Republicans than they do the Democrats. Some Democrats, Manchin, others like him, get directly from oil companies. Mostly it's Republicans. It's Wall Street. Wall Street is heavily invested. And we know Wall Street is the preferred boss of the Democratic Party. They're heavily invested in all these fossil fuckers. The Dakota Access Pipeline, it was a who's who. Bank of America, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, all invested. Keystone, if that was ever to be constructed, Wall Street was invested in. Wall Street has been heavily invested in the fracking all over this country. Wall Street's also very invested in uranium mining. So Biden is only going to send a gingerly worded letter slapping these CEOs on the wrist, but he's not actually going to play hardball. He ain't going to revoke subsidies, not revoking tax breaks. He's not going to do anything that could actually make them cave, because these donors, the big oil donors, are in league with his Wall Street donors, and he doesn't want to piss any of them off. That's why we live in the United Corporations of America. That's why I'm not saying totally give up on electoral politics, but that's why I've been saying for a while, we're going to have to think bigger. We're going to have to get outside of the electoral system, focus a lot more outside. We're going to have to do more than just, boots on the ground protests, because they'll allow you to circle around the same blocks over and over again protesting. I've covered this similar protests for 7 years. It's the same blocks in New York, DC, and elsewhere. It's the same chants. It's the same song. But if you actually start adding an economic component to it, economic protests, whether it's boycotts, whether it's choosing, to boycott for several weeks, try to go for months, economic actions against big banking, economic actions against community banks that are not doing right in their communities, grocery stores that are not doing right in their communities, fast food restaurants, Amazon, Walmart. I mean, we could go on and on. Now, this is obviously a lot easier said than done. People are working multiple jobs, raising kids, $5 a gallon gas, food prices out of control, electricity out of control. It's hard to then say, hey, let's go on a strike. Economically, a lot of people say, I can't afford to do that, or I'm going to be out on the streets. That's why it's going to take, in communities, people starting to come together and organize, not just for a one-day Medicare for All march, but actual economic actions with a pot of mutual aid. Mutual aid is very important to that. But I just think it's funny because the media is covering this like, oh, Biden's taking it to the fossil fuckers. Biden is doing nothing. He's not taking it to them. He's writing a little gingerly worded letter, making it seem like he's doing something when he could be ranting at a press conference. He could be rallying outside of some of these oil refineries. And you know what? The people would be behind him. I think even progressives would be behind him if he did that. He could be saying, you know what? We gave you X amount this year in subsidies. I don't think you need it anymore. We're going to pull back. Actually, we're going to start looking into how much money, how much taxes you pay or don't pay. He ain't going to do it. And we know why. So it's not just a shirt, folks. This is the United Corporations of America. Thanks for watching, and make sure to tune in to Status Coup's daily live stream Monday through Thursday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time and Fridays at 4 o'clock Eastern Time.